now, our documentary, Ruling Iran. When Iran makes the news, it's often that country's flamboyant and provocative president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who finds himself under the spotlight. But the man who wields real power in Iran is the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The BBC's Tehran correspondent James Reynolds examines now how Mr. Khamenei won and has maintained his grip on power.
میگن ما دست دراز کردیم به سمت ایران. خب این چه جور دستی است؟
In Iran, the word of Ali Khamenei is absolute. For more than 2 decades, he's been his country's supreme leader. But the outside world knows perhaps only 2 things about him. He has almost the same name as the man he replaced, Ayatollah Khomeini, and in public, he's overshadowed by the man he outranks, Iran's president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. When we do see Ali Khamenei, he's often delivering a sermon against the United States, looking rather forbidding in a black turban and white beard. But it turns out that this same man also writes letters to Americans, he has a watering can, and he enjoys poetry. It's time to get to know the Ayatollah. Ali Khamenei was born in 1939 in the northern city of Mashhad, the holiest city in Iran. He followed his father and became a cleric. It wasn't an easy choice. Khamenei grew up during the rule of the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was a secular monarch who viewed religion as ancient and suspicious. Mehdi Halaji is writing a biography of the Ayatollah.
Khamenei became a cleric when he was very young, 11 years old, and immediately he wore the turban and the clerical uniform, which was very difficult for him when he was playing with children on the streets. People were mocking him. That was the era of Pahlavi and the secularization of the society. Clerics were under suppression of the government and so on. So he had a very difficult life.
But Khamenei kept going. He got married and had 6 children. We've come across a handful of pictures of him standing rather stiffly with his 4 sons, but we haven't seen a single picture of his wife or daughters. The cleric's nephew, Mahmoud Moradkhani, remembers his uncle as a quiet man who loved poetry.
Ali Khamenei is my uncle, and I have no negative memories of him. He was very nice and sociable. Interestingly, though, in my memories, he was unremarkable. He didn't stand out in any way. He was very ordinary. For example, people from Mashhad have poetic tendencies. All Iranians have a poetry notebook, and we all love the arts. But there wasn't anything unique about him.
But in many ways, Ali Khamenei did stand out. He liked to smoke cigarettes and even a pipe, a very unusual habit for a religious man. During the 1970s, he also supported the Shah's main enemy, the exiled cleric Ayatollah Khomeini. The Ayatollah wanted to bring Islamic rule to Iran. Khamenei tried to spread the Ayatollah's message inside the country. For this, the Shah's police arrested him 6 times. At the same time, Marxist groups were also trying to get rid of the Shah. So the cleric, Ali Khamenei, ended up sharing a prison cell with the young communist, Hushang Assadi. The cleric and the communist got on rather well.
He was nice, he was great, he was kind, he was a very good man.
In what way?
In any way. In talking about literature, talking about love, joking and...
What would he joke about?
The very, very small things that doesn't any relation with sexuality.
So no sexuality?
No sexuality. Anytime I wanted enter to any way to sexuality, he told me, Hushang, stop. Please stop.
And you stopped?
Yes, sometimes.
Did you ever think that he would end up as the supreme leader of Iran?
Never and never and never and never.
Then came 1979. The Shah fell. Ayatollah Khomeini stepped off the plane from Paris and founded the Islamic Republic. Iran was to be ruled by clerics, and Ali Khamenei was one of them. The 40-year-old became a member of the new ruler's inner circle. He was even sent to play a part in the defining event of the revolution, the takeover of the US embassy in Tehran. Iranian students held more than 50 US diplomats hostage. The hostages included political officer John Limbert. One day, 5 months into his captivity, he had an unannounced visitor.
In the afternoon, Khamenei shows up. And Khamenei at the time was on the Supreme Defense Council. He was really Khomeini's representative. He was definitely an important person.
The conversation between the two men, in Farsi, was recorded by Iranian state TV. The two are seen chatting with great passion.
What I wanted to do was to use what I knew of Iran and Iranians as a kind of leverage against him. So when he said, for example, "Do you have any complaints?" I said, well, my only complaint is that the students, I think, have overdone traditional Iranian hospitality. And I know that Iranians do not want their guests to leave, and they try to keep them as long as they can, but this is really ridiculous. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He was clearly not a stupid person. He knew that I was taunting him, and he didn't quite know what to do, because my point was a very simple one, which is this absolutely outrageous and ugly and shameful act was in direct violation of Iran's own deepest cultural traditions.
But Khamenei got through the encounter, and a few months later he survived an assassination attempt. An opposition group detonated a bomb during a press conference. Khamenei lost the use of his right arm. While he was still recovering, he was elected president. It was a powerless, thankless job. During those years, he was seen as a dogged, faithful follower, not as a potential supreme leader. Then, in June 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini died. Iran's leading clerics came together to pick a new ruler. No one knew whom to choose. Then, one ambitious politician, Hashemi Rafsanjani, intervened. He announced that the late Ayatollah had secretly told him the name of the best person to succeed him. The Imam chose Khamenei, Rafsanjani told the clerics. The vote was taken, and Ali Khamenei was chosen as supreme leader. He closed his eyes and rubbed his nose. He was only 49 years old, but he looked much, much older. Karim Sajjadpour from the Carnegie Endowment in Washington has been studying the Ayatollah for years.
When Khamenei was first chosen to replace Ayatollah Khomeini as supreme leader, it was a decision which in many ways was made by Hashemi Rafsanjani, who was then Speaker of the Parliament and then became President. And Rafsanjani was Khamenei's kingmaker, essentially, and he believed that having someone like Khamenei as supreme leader would allow him, Rafsanjani, more control, that Khamenei would be his kind of benign ally and allow him to run the country, which really came back to haunt Rafsanjani.
Khamenei was picked in order to preserve the Islamic Revolution, not to overturn it, to follow the ideas of Ayatollah Khomeini, not to suggest his own. His biographer Mehdi Halaji again.
He is a very ordinary man, and I think that's the key for his success. He planned everything. He thought about everything. When he became a leader, he had nothing. He did not have the charisma of Ayatollah Khomeini. He lacked religious and political credential.
Ali Khamenei came to office with much to prove, especially to the religious scholars who looked down upon him. Karim Sajjadpour again.
When Khamenei was chosen to replace Khomeini, he wasn't an Ayatollah. He was kind of given the title of Ayatollah overnight. He was the equivalent of someone with a master's degree being appointed head of a university, presiding over people who have PhDs when he himself had a master's degree. And this is what happened from the beginning, that Khamenei had this sense of insecurity that, someone who was really a mid-ranking cleric is appointed to be Ayatollah, supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, and presiding over clerics who were ayatollahs and in some cases grand ayatollahs. So from the very outset, Khamenei was in a position of insecurity. And so therefore, because he didn't have the legitimacy of the seminary, he had to seek the legitimacy of the barracks.
So he decided to build an alliance with the Revolutionary Guard, the military force which protects the revolution. For Khamenei's biographer, Mehdi Halaji, this was to be the Ayatollah's most successful move.
One of the main things he did was a very precise and subtle plan to empower Revolutionary Guard after Iran-Iraq war. And by relying on them and empowering them, he consolidated his own power and became a very strong leader.
A leader who disappointed some of his old friends. Khamenei's former cellmate Houshang Assadi watched the Ayatollah's assumption of absolute power with great disappointment. In the 70s, the cleric and the communist had fought together for an end to the rule of the Shah. Now, the communist believes that his former cellmate has betrayed the cause for which the two men once fought.
Completely, he changed from a man who fights for freedom to a dictator. Mr. Khamenei is again a dictator and more dictator than Shah.
Khamenei is the spring of heaven, his enemies are barren, chant the leader's supporters during a military parade. Ali Khamenei may have the same absolute power as the Shah had in the 60s and 70s, but he leads a very different life. The Shah travelled around the world and enjoyed banquets and horse-drawn carriages. Ali Khamenei never leaves Iran. His greatest extravagance appears to be tending to a small garden. One photo shows him happily using a plastic watering can. So how can the outside world reach out to a man who leads such a frugal, hermetic life?
In particular, I would like to speak directly to the people and leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Nowruz is just one part of your...
In 2009, President Obama broadcast a greeting for Iran's new year. He even wrote the Supreme Leader a couple of letters. But Ali Khamenei has rejected Barack Obama's approaches. Karim Sajjadpour again.
I think for Ayatollah Khamenei, enmity towards the United States was really a fundamental pillar of the 1979 revolution, and it remains central to the identity of the Islamic Republic. If you're a 72-year-old cleric and you're presiding over a population, 70% of whom were born after the 1979 revolution, I think you recognize that you can rule in a closed environment. But if you restore relations with the United States, you succumb to the forces of globalization. This is going to severely undermine your grip on power.
As a rule, the Ayatollah refuses to meet Americans. But in 2009, one US citizen travelled to Iran hoping that Khamenei would make an exception. John Bryson Chain is the Episcopal Bishop of Washington. He went to Tehran for a conference on religion. He asked if he could meet the Supreme Leader for cleric-to-cleric talks.
An individual came up to me and said, if you could step outside of the room in 10 minutes, that would be wonderful. And they didn't tell me why. And I noticed that 2 or 3 other people were stepping out of the room at different times. They were former prime ministers of countries. And then I stepped out, and immediately in the hallway was an entourage of people who escorted us downstairs and said, you are going to be meeting with the leader. And I think back to the meeting that I had, and I'm sitting there going, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm simply a bishop. But when I said that to him, I said, I'm not a politician. I'm a religious person. I'm a bishop and a theologian, and probably a bad bishop, but I don't know. And I have nothing prepared to say to you other than it's important to have this time with you, and it's important to have this conversation because of what we both know is ongoing between the West and Iran. And when I said that, he smiled. And that really cracked open the door for the invitation to continue conversation.
And since they met in Tehran, the Ayatollah and the bishop have stayed in touch.
I had a letter from him just before Christmas. This particular letter was a letter about the commonalities that our two faith traditions share. were part of the Abrahamic family, and I wrote to him one other time to thank him for the opportunity to meet with him. And then in this letter, it was just to talk about how we really needed to continue the conversations that we had in Iran, and that it was really important to hold true to the common values that both of our faith traditions consider to be central.
So it turns out that the supreme leader who hates the United States is also pen pals with one of its citizens. Leading Americans know one thing. If you really want to reach the Ayatollah, you can always try writing to him. In 2007, the Iranian-American academic Haleh Esfandiari was jailed in Tehran while she was visiting her elderly mother. Her colleague, a former Democratic Congressman Lee Hamilton, wrote to Khamenei to try to free her. And she waited in her prison cell with the Ayatollah on her mind.
I used to see his picture every day. So there is no way I could not reflect. The picture was not in my cell, but the picture was in the interrogation room, and the picture was in the hallway. And when I was not blindfolded, I could see his picture. So automatically, when you live in a system like this, you think that the person who ultimately can release you from prison is this person. And at the end, it turned out to be right. It was apparently his intervention, and I'm not sure what he told whom, that led to my release. There was an exchange of letter between the then president of the Wilson Center, Lee Hamilton, and the supreme leader. And Lee Hamilton asked him whether he could release me based on humanitarian grant. And there was an exchange of letters. I never saw the content of the letter, but a couple of weeks later, I was released.
For the Ayatollah, writing those letters may be a real effort. He had to learn how to write left-handed after the assassination attempt 30 years ago. His right hand, which he can no longer use, is a constant reminder of the attack. He told one audience in Tehran that surviving the explosion changed his life.
I was in pretty bad shape after the attack, because no one thought I would survive. I felt that I was at death's door. In the days that followed, I thought, why have I survived? And it dawned on me that our heavenly God wanted me to survive for a reason.
Khamenei's faith in God's mission for him may have been tested in 2009. Supporters of the opposition Green movement rose up after the disputed presidential election. Death to the dictator, they shout. In the end, the Ayatollah sent forces to crush the demonstrations. Amid the high emotions of that year, the leader promised his weeping supporters that he would never step aside.
من جان ناقابلی دارم.
I have a poor soul, an incomplete body, and a little bit of dignity that you have given me. I will sacrifice it all for the revolution and for Islam, he told the crowd.
جسم ناقصی دارم.
For Karim Sajjadpour, this was unsurprising.
Khamenei believes that when you compromise under pressure, it's not going to alleviate and allay the pressure against you. Compromise under pressure projects weakness and invites even more pressure. So that's why we've seen that when the population is rising up in Iran, Khamenei has refused to cede 1 inch, because he believes that if he starts showing signs of compromise, that the population will sense that he's weak and will pounce. Likewise, in the face of threats of military action or sanctions from the United States, Khamenei has refused to cede 1 inch.
The Ayatollah does not back down. From exile in Paris, Hushang Asadi now feels that he no longer recognizes his former cellmate, the cleric who used to laugh at his jokes.
If you met him now, what would you say to him?
First, I say, I don't know you. Who are you, Mr. Khamenei? And second, I ask him, do you have time to back to the man who you was? And suggest him, go to television and tell to Iranian people, please forgive me. All I do was against the Iranian people. All I do was wrong, and less the society finds its way for freedom and liberty.
Do you think that will happen?
I think he killed me first. No, I'm joking. I don't know what happened. But I guess nothing happened. Because when you get a dictator, your ears is closed. Your eyes is blind. You can't see anything and you can't hear anything.
But the Ayatollah retains the loyalty of the Revolutionary Guard. This allows him as supreme leader to dominate and outmaneuver the elected president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ali Khamenei has now ruled Iran for twice as long as Ayatollah Khomeini before him. He's 72 years old. When he dies, will Iran search for its third supreme leader, John Limbert, and then Karim Sajjadpour?
There's a real question, I think, whether the institution of supreme leader will survive. Because the Constitution of the Islamic Republic, which established the office of supreme leader, is a suit of clothes that really fits only one man. And that was Khomeini. And it was Khomeini's design or political ideas expressed in his writings and his speeches over decades that led to the creation of this very peculiar kind of government, where you have a republican structure paralleled by a sort of theological structure. Khamenei has taken part of that rule because he was very close to Khomeini, he was very close to his ideas, and has been able to take at least part of that suit of clothes and wear it. But when he goes, there's nobody around.
It's increasingly difficult to believe that in the 21st century, this very young, modern Iranian population is going to be willing to be ruled by a quote-unquote supreme leader who purports to be God's representative on earth. So I think it's certainly within the realm of possibilities that Ayatollah Khamenei will be Iran's last supreme leader.
But the Ayatollah will fight to pass on the system he inherited. If there is any conflict within him, it is hidden well away. If he has any doubt, Ali Khamenei will not share it. He has been a cleric for 60 years and the guardian of a religious revolution for more than 20. In the end, it is to God alone that the supreme leader feels he must answer.